It was my 25th birthday, and the silence at the dinner table was heavier than my mother's pot roast. This wasn't a celebration. It was a court summons I attended every year. I sat opposite my father, Frank, a man who measured a person's worth in pay stubs and job titles. Beside him was my mother, Susan, a woman whose entire life was a tightrope walk, carefully balancing to keep my father's moods from toppling over into anger. Gathering what little courage I had, I decided to share a small victory. I told them, I'd just signed my biggest client yet for my fledgling digital marketing business. My father didn't even look up from cutting his food. A small dismissive scoff escaped his lips. "That's nice," he said, the words dripping with condescension. "But when are you going to stop playing on the computer and get a real job? One with benefits, a pension, like your brother." As before I could even process the sting, he slid a cheap, glossy brochure across the polished wood of the table. It stopped right beside my plate. On the front, circled in thick blue pen, were the words Office Administration. "It's stable," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "It's realistic for you." The air just vanished from my lungs. The insult wasn't just in the words, it was the complete erasure of the thousands of hours I'd poured into my dream. My gaze flickered to my mother, who offered only a weak, apologetic smile that begged me not to make a scene. She was polishing the piece even as it was killing me. I just stared at the brochure, at the future he had deemed appropriate for me. A small, stable, passionless box, and in that moment, looking at that cheap, glossy brochure, something inside me didn't just break. It went cold. This wasn't criticism. This was a life sentence. And I knew it wasn't the first time they'd handed one down. That cold feeling from the dinner table followed me home, clinging to me like the winter air. It wasn't just about the brochure or the casual cruelty of my father's words. It was about the weight of history, a history that played on a loop in my mind that night. A history starring my brother, Brandon, the family's charismatic but reckless golden child, who wore his charm like a suit of armor against any and all consequences. I remembered his 20th birthday, 5 years ago. He'd just dropped out of his second university program, and to celebrate this failure, my parents threw him a fresh start party. The centerpiece of this fresh start was a brand new sedan, gleaming in the driveway with a giant red bow on the hood. My father, beaming, had his arm around Brandon's shoulders, telling all the relatives that you have to invest in your boys. Potential, I watched from the kitchen window, tracing the route of the city bus on a crumpled schedule. That car wasn't a car. It was a symbol. It was the physical manifestation of a family rule. Brandon's needs were investments, while mine were expenses. A year later, that rule was carved into stone. I had been working freelance for months, building the foundations of my business on a slow, dying laptop that sounded like a jet engine every time I opened a design file. I spent a week building up my courage, preparing a binder with my earnings reports and client testimonials. I approached my parents not for a handout, but for a simple cosign on a loan for a new computer, a tool absolutely essential for my work. My father flipped through my meticulously prepared folder with disinterest before closing it shut. He said the laptop was too expensive, and that I needed to learn to be more responsible with money, especially since I didn't have a steady paycheck to rely on. Then my mother delivered the knockout blow, the line she always used when she was denying me something I needed. "You're the strong one, honey," she'd said, patting my arm. "You'll figure it out." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Standing in their living room, I could see Brandon's investment parked in the driveway, the one he'd already gotten 2 speeding tickets in. They wouldn't co-sign a loan for me for $1,500, but they'd dropped $25,000 on him without a second thought. I ended up working a second job as a waitress for 6 months, saving every single dollar until I could finally walk into a store and buy that laptop with my own cash. I never felt so proud, and I never felt so alone. That was the core of the family's false narrative, the story they told themselves to make the blatant favoritism feel like sound parenting. Brandon's constant financial disasters, the maxed out credit cards, the loans for rent he never paid back were always framed as him just needing a little more help to get on his feet. My father would praise his people skills even after he was fired from a job for showing up late, while my growing client list was just a cute little hobby. Anytime I tried to point out the disparity, my mother would rush in to smooth it over. "Oh, your father just worries about you," she'd say, "or the real killer. Your brother is just more sensitive than you are. He needs our support." Their love was a resource allocated to the neediest, and my competence was my curse. My independence wasn't a source of pride for them. It was an excuse to look away. They saw Brandon's dependence as love, and my independence as coldness. Every dollar I saved was a dollar they didn't have to spend. And they praised my frugality while I was eating instant noodles so I could afford the software subscriptions they refused to help with. Lying in bed that night after the birthday dinner, I replayed it all in my head. The car, the laptop, the endless excuses. And I finally accepted it. They would never see me as an investment, so I decided to become one for myself. That night, a switch flipped inside me. The desperate need for their approval, the hurt that had defined so much of my life, didn't just disappear. It crystallized. It turned from a messy, emotional wound into a single, sharp point of focus. I made a conscious decision right then and there. I was done fighting for a seat at their table. I was going to build my own damn building. The hurt became fuel, and I poured every last drop of it into my business, transforming years of feeling invisible into a relentless work ethic. My social life vanished, replaced by 80-hour work weeks. Holidays became planning sessions, and weekends were for chasing new leads. My world shrank down to my laptop screen, but my business and my power grew exponentially. My definition of receipts changed to I stopped collecting memories of past lives and started collecting assets. I opened a new business bank account, one my family knew nothing about, and watching the balance climb became my new obsession. Every deposit was a quiet act of rebellion. Every new client was another brick in the wall I was building around myself, a wall to keep their judgment out, and my success in this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving that I had been right about myself all along. The evidence of my worth wasn't going to be in their validation, but in cold, hard numbers on a bank statement they would never see. 3 years passed like that, in a blur of caffeine and code. I was no longer a freelancer struggling in my bedroom. I had a small office, 2 employees, and a portfolio of clients that would make my father's head spin. The goal was no longer just survival, it was dominance. I started looking into commercial real estate as a way to invest my profits, to make my money work for me. One night while scrolling through property listings, a random electrifying thought struck me like lightning. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed a familiar address into the search. Bar the address of my father's accounting firm. It was the building he had worked in for 20 years. The very symbol of the real job he held up as the pinnacle of achievement. I found it instantly. A mid-sized commercial property, owned by a small, aging LLC. My heart was pounding. On a wild impulse, I hired a commercial real estate agent to make a discreet inquiry to see if the owners might be open to an off-market offer. A week later, the answer came back. They were. The plan was born in that moment, fully formed and terrifyingly perfect. It wasn't about revenge, it was about narrative. It was about taking the one thing my father respected, a physical building, a tangible asset, and making it mine. It was poetic justice of the highest order. I had the capital, I had the target. The owners were willing to sell. All that was left was to sign the papers and wait for the perfect moment to introduce my father to his new landlord. For 6 months, I let the silence do the work. The deal was closed, the ownership transferred, and I managed my new asset through a property management company, a wall of corporate anonymity. I waited. I knew the moment would come, and I knew it would be on my terms, in my own time. The perfect stage, I decided, would be the same one where my new life began, my parents' Sunday dinner table. I walked in feeling a calm I hadn't known was possible. The nervous, invisible girl who had sat there a few years ago was gone. In her place was a woman who knew the outcome before the game even began. And just as I predicted, my father served the opportunity up on a silver platter. He was furious. He spent the first 20 minutes of the meal ranting, his voice getting louder with every complaint. "It's unbelievable," he fumed, slamming his fork down. "The building was sold a few months ago to some faceless blood corporation from out of state, and they're turning the screws on us." I took a slow sip of water, savoring the irony. He complained that the new owners were cold and impersonal, that they'd raised the common area maintenance fees, started enforcing the parking rules with an iron fist, and were demanding all tenants upgrade their liability insurance. I listened to him list the new policies, my policies, one by one. "They're trying to squeeze us little guys out." He finally spat, his face red with indignation. My brother, Brandon, ever the echo, chimed in with his brilliant advice. "You should sue them, Dad. That's what I'd do." I had to hide a smile. Sue me? For what? Following the terms of the lease he had signed, I let the air settle, letting his anger hang there for a long moment. Then, quietly, I placed a thin manila folder on the table between the salt and pepper shakers. The sound was soft, but it cut through the tension like a gunshot. My father stopped talking and stared at it. That faceless corporation is actually a limited liability company. Dad, I said, my voice even and calm. It's not from out of state, and I'd really appreciate it if you didn't call my company blood-sucking. I opened the folder and slid a single piece of paper across the table towards him. It was the LLC registration document from the state. At the bottom, under the section marked Sole Proprietor, was my name in clear printed letters. He picked it up as if it might burn him. His eyes scanned the page once, then twice. The angry red in his face drained away, replaced by a pale, sickly white. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine shock in his eyes, the kind of shock you see when someone's entire reality crumbles in an instant. My mother, seeing his reaction, immediately jumped into her role as the family's frantic diplomat. "Honey, this is a joke, right?" she said with a nervous laugh, looking back and forth between us. "A little prank? Tell your father you're just joking." But Brandon knew better. He snatched the paper from our father's trembling hand. His jaw didn't just drop, it went slack with a look of pure ugly jealousy. "How?" he hissed, his eyes narrowing at me. "How did you get that kind of money?" I looked past my panicked mother and my envious brother, and I spoke directly to my father, who was still speechless. "I stopped taking your advice, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of triumph or anger. "It was just a statement of fact. I built the business you mocked. I worked while you and Brandon were watching TV, and used the profits to buy the building that houses the real job you always wanted for me." I leaned forward slightly. "You were my tenant. The new policies aren't personal. They're just standard risk management for a commercial property of this size. It's just business." They all just stared at me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible daughter or the struggling artist. I was the one holding all the cards. And in the ringing silence, I didn't feel rage or even triumph. I just felt free. For the first time, I was the one who got to walk away. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. It felt like stepping out of a suffocating room and into the clean night air. I got in my car, and before I even turned the key, I blocked their numbers. All of them. The silence in my car was profound, a stark contrast to the storm I knew was brewing in the house I'd just left behind. That storm, however, was no longer my problem. I had spent a lifetime weathering their emotional hurricanes, and for the first time, I had simply chosen to walk away before the first drop of rain fell. The freedom in that small act was so immense, so powerful, it felt like I could finally truly breathe. Of course, the storm still tried to find me. The next few weeks were a deluge of blocked calls that went straight to voicemail and a flood of emails that bypassed my filters. My mother's messages were masterpieces of guilt and manipulation. "You are tearing this family apart over money." One of them read, "Your father is devastated. How could you be so cold? After everything we've done for you." I read the words "everything we've done for you" and felt nothing. The old sting was gone. The internal ledger I'd kept for so long was paid in full. Then came my father's attempts. His emails were a clumsy mix of blustering anger and pathetic pleading. He demanded a meeting to discuss a family discount on the rent, reminding me, in all caps, that he was my father and that I owed him respect. He tried to use the one weapon he had left our shared blood to claim a power he had long since forfeited, but his weapon had no effect. The armor I had built over the last 3 years was too strong. I responded to each of his demands with the same simple method. I would reply in a polite, professional email, addressing him as Mr. Franklin, and patiently explain that all lease terms were standard across the building and could not be altered. And on every single email, I CC'd my property manager. This small act, the simple addition of a third party, was my masterstroke. It stripped him of his ability to make it personal. It drew a clean, uncrossable line between his role as my father and his role as my tenant. Our family drama was irrelevant. In a business transaction, and with every professional reply, I took back a little more of the power he'd held over me my entire life. The emotional leverage was gone. He was just another tenant, and he had no idea how to handle it. A year later, my life was unrecognizable. My small office had been upgraded to a larger suite in a downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows. I had a small dedicated team of 4 incredible employees, was providing the real jobs my father so deeply admired. I found that I was a good boss, a fair leader, because I knew what it felt like to be unseen and undervalued. One sunny afternoon, I stood on the empty concrete floor of a warehouse on the industrial side of town, my real estate agent beside me. We were discussing the potential for converting it into a multi-unit creative space. The scale of it, the ambition, it didn't scare me anymore. It energized me. My world was no longer about reacting to my family. It was about creating my future. I heard about my father's firm through the grapevine. He hadn't been able to meet the new insurance requirements and couldn't justify the standardized rent increase when his lease came up for renewal. He ended up moving his office to a smaller, drab space in a strip mall across town. Our relationship was non-existent, and the most surprising part was that I felt no guilt, no lingering anger. I just felt a quiet, detached pity. My brother, Brandon, I heard, was still living at home, bouncing between get-rich-quick schemes. The family dynamic I had escaped was still churning away, a closed loop of enabling and disappointment. But I was no longer a part of that machine. I had resigned my position. Tonight, I'm sitting in my own apartment, one that I bought with cash 6 months ago. It's minimalist and clean, with a large window that looks out over the city skyline. The lights twinkle below like a blanket of fallen stars. I'm holding a warm cup of tea, and the silence isn't heavy or tense. It's peaceful. It's the sound of my life, on my terms. I am my own real job. I am my own stability. I am my own home. And as I watch the city lights, a slow, genuine smile spreads across my face. It's not a smile of victory or revenge. It's the smile of a woman who is finally, completely, at peace. I spent so many years trying to get a seat at their table, I never realized I had the power to build my own. And from where I'm sitting now, the view is incredible. If you've ever had to build your own table instead of waiting for an invitation, share your story in the comments. I see you, and I'm saving you a seat.